Okay, Tov, today's daf is Daf Kuf Vav in Ksubas. Make a see you in less than a week, Mr. Hashem. We're continuing the discussion. Yesterday we had a point was made in the bottom of the Gemara on Amid Beis that Bikurim, which is normally given to a Kohen, however, if it's given to a Talmud Chacham, that is, if you give a gift, any gift, you give a gift to a Talmud Chacham, it's as if you're giving Bikurim to the Kohen, bringing it to the Mizbeach. So maybe during the Talmud Chacham, Kilumakar Bikurim. So this leads us into the next story, which is about where we left off yesterday, about 10 lines down of the page. On Gav Kufav Avadal, B'Shnei Rav Yosef, in the years of Yosef Rischa, there was anger in the world, meaning Hashem was angry, and therefore there was a famine. Because of anger of Hashem, there was a famine. The rabbi says, Rav Yosef, boy ma rachme, you should pray for mercy from God, so that we'll get relief from the famine. Amalahu, so he told him, Hashta Uma Elisha. This is why the story is brought down here, obviously, because we referred to the story about how they brought the man came from Baal Shalisha, and they brought Elisha these loaves of bread, etc. in the Carmel. It says, Uma Elisha, when the rabbis would leave Elisha after a lecture or a Torah lecture, whatever, after they leave him, just remaining with him, let's say to have a meal with him, after most of the tzibur had left, most of the rabbis had left, how many remained? 2,200. And Elisha had these 2,200 people, just rabbis remained with him after everybody left. But when the time of anger, when there was a famine, lo havi boy rachme, he could not ask for rachmim. He didn't pray for rachmim because he felt that wasn't strong enough. He didn't have enough power. And Rashi says, and there were 2,200 left. Now, how do you know that there were 2,200 left? So we'll see in a second. But the point was that even though Elisha had with him 2,200 rabbis, he didn't pray for rachmim. I know about rachmim. I should help. You think I'm going to be able to help it alone? Think I, even with my Talmidim, will be able to help this alone? So that's what Rabbi Yosef said. Elisha, with 2,200 remaining rabbis, couldn't do it. How do you expect me to do it? We might have Pashiachia. How do we know that 2,200 rabbis were left with Elisha after the most of the tzibur left? The says, Yomi Mashar, so his servant said to him, Ma'atain zeh, I guess it was Gershon saying, Ma'atain zeh lifnei mea ish. What should I give this in front of 100 people? Now, what do we mean in front of 100? My lifnei mea ish. What was he giving in front of 100 people? The man came from Bel Shalisha, and he brought with him lechem bikurim. Lechem bikurim is, let's say, one loaf. And then it says esrim lechem sarim, and maybe there was one loaf of wheat, and then 20 loaves of barley, vikarmel, and also fresh grains, bitziklono, in his sack. So he counts a total of 22. You have 1 plus 20 plus another one, 22 loaves. Now, what does he mean by that? He says, should I give this in front of 100 people? If he gave all 22 loaves in front of 100 people, that's a lot for a year. If it's time of famine, to give 22 loaves in front of 100 people, that's pretty good. They'll each get a pretty good portion. Can't mean that. Means that each loaf was divided up among 100 people. That was what was on the side. That's what he said. Should I give one loaf to each 100 people? And there were 22 loaves. That shows you that there were 2,200 people. So that was the story there. And it's brought down, obviously, because we just learned about Elisha receiving this bikurim from somebody giving a gift, and that was considered like bikurim. Once we mentioned here about the number of rabbis who were left after the tzibur left just to have his meal with him. So it tells you other stories here too about rabbis, how many people they had left. When they left the yeshiva of Rav, Alpha Masan Rabbanim, 1,200 rabbis, 1,200 rabbis remained. When they left Rav Huna, when the Shiur was over, he had 800 rabbis or student rabbis remain with him. 800. Rav Huna, Rav Huna used to darshan. They were talking here about Rav Huna. He used to darshan with 13 different interpreters. In other words, he would darshan to them, and then they would, in all directions, because the tzibur was so good, they would repeat his shiur in front of them, like an interpreter or an explainer. He would do that. When the rabbis would get up from the shiur, from the lesson, and they would shake out their coats, I guess, from the dirt. They were sitting there for a long time. Afka, the dust rose up. There were so many rabbis there. In other words, what we just said, that 800 remained. That means there were thousands and thousands of students. And when they would get up from a shiur, they didn't have, I guess, loudspeakers in those days, and they had interpreters and went out in all directions to explain it. When they would get up and shake their garments out, the dust would rise up a kasi layoma and obscure the sun. There was so much dust that rose just from these thousands and thousands of people shaking out their coats. The dust rose up. They didn't have hard floors. It was all dust and dirt. So that the dust would rise up and obscure the light of the day. But Ami Bamrafa and Eretz Yisrael, they were able to see that big cloud of dust. And they said in Eretz Yisrael, they just got up from Rav Huna's shiur. From Eretz Yisrael, they were able to see that. In Bavel, they just got up from Rav Huna's drasha. That's what they were able to see. Rav of Yosef, when the rabbis left from the yeshiva, Rav of Yosef, 400 remained. They call themselves like Yisomim, like we're the ones who were left. When they left Abayi, these were maybe lesser rabbis. There were 200 rabbis left. They call themselves the orphans of the orphans. As they were even a smaller amount, and they call themselves by that name. All right, that completes this discussion about based on what we started with Elisha. What did we mentioned the other day? Again, this is also brought down. What's it doing over here? There was an allusion the other day. We said that the Dayanim, we mentioned the two Dayanim, Admon and Hanan Danik Yishalom, and we said there was other ones. There was Hanan Mitzri, and maybe there was another one according to Rav Nassan. There was another one, Nachum Amadi. There were others, and how do they get paid? So we had that discussion yesterday. He said, well, they got paid from the Shiurei HaLishcha, meaning from the temple funds that were donated. Remember, every Adar before Nisan, everybody would give a half a shekel, and that would go towards the karbonos, as we'll see. That's used for karbonos. So from that money, they also took their wages. That's what we said. They took their wages. The rabbi said they take their wages. How are they allowed to take wages? Right? You're not allowed to take wages, but they had to be occupied with something. We said they got 9,900 shekels for the Bezdin, 900 from Tumas Alishcha, and if that wasn't enough, they were added on more. In other words, they had to be provided. Then we had a whole discussion about taking it from the litigants. That you shouldn't do, right? You shouldn't take it from the litigants unless it's very clear that you're just saying, listen, you want me to stop my job here? I'm in the middle of sewing or weaving or taking care of my fields. If you want to give me somebody else or pay me for my time, for lost wages, for unemployment, okay, then I'm doing it. But it's clear you're not being paid for the job. Yeah.
They asked for payment after the judgment. In other words, like court costs.
Yeah. So it's the same thing. Doesn't mean they're paid before or afterwards.
No, from the litigants.
Either way, if they know the money's coming, that's the same, considered a bribe. If they know the money's coming from them, they're only allowed to do it if they're saying, and maybe they were indeed. If it's clear, we said yesterday, if it's clear that they're being paid only for their loss of time from work for their unemployment, then they can't. Could be that they paid them at the end of the job. That could also be. It doesn't mean that they're paid at the beginning or the end. Main thing is that they're paid, that their wages are covered, but their wages are based on unemployment. However, if they weren't getting money from the litigants in any way, shape, or form, simply at the time of the base mikdash, they were paid out of the lishka, out of the truma lishka. Again, they were paid. Why were they allowed to do that? After all, that wasn't for karbanos itself. The truma lishka was for karbanos. So now we're going to have a discussion about if other things were also allowed to be paid from there. And one of the things we said is the judges. Is that related? That could be that if you don't have proper judges, you might also come to mess around with the karbanos, that you might come to make a mistake with karbanos. But the Mefarshim seem to say that it's more that, as we'll see, Leib Bezin Basna Lei, and that Bezin said, okay, fine. The main purpose of this money is for karbanos. However, they had the power to say that we can use that money for other things too, as are necessary. So
you would never get money from the litigants after the fact. Only before. That's what we talked about before. Because after the fact, what if they didn't collect?
Yeah, they didn't collect.
You'd never do it after.
They gave him a check. They gave him a bank check. They gave him a bank check. It was good. It was good afterwards. Right? A guarantee of some sort. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Before it doesn't say clearly Yeah, obviously, you want to always get the money before, but he said that
This isn't
it
exactly-
wasn't clear from the Gemara that they had to get the money actually before they did the judgment. Maybe the payment was paid before or after. The point was that what's the source of the money? Is the source that they're paying them or as wages or anything like that? Even if they take money for the judgment itself, that's also improper. We said if they take money, that's no good. It's bottle. So it doesn't mean that. We mean to say that it's mechur if it's not clear that they're just getting paid for their unemployment. They're not allowed to take money. It's the same thing with rabbis today or teachers or anybody involved in something that's holy. You're not supposed to get money for that. You can get money only because that is schar batal, because otherwise you could have been driving a bus or digging ditches or doing some other job that would pay money.
Today, by the way, today we do it, not in the courts, of course, but in arbitration.
Yeah.
Two people, which is a court
Yeah.
supervised process, you pay
Yeah.
for the arbiter. You pay the arbiter.
You pay
the judge.
You pay the best, and also I was just
Well,
told
there's
some. You
that's more of an agura. That's
Yeah,
not-
okay, but you're paying.
arbitration, you pay
Yeah.
the fee of the
I guess
judge.
you're paying. I guess you're paying the judges. The way they probably do it today is you're paying the organization,
Right,
that handles
right.
it,
You pay-
and the judges themselves are being paid for their loss of time, like we explain with anybody else, rabbis, teachers, etc.
Wasn't there other, instead of taking money from the Maxi Chetzi shekel,
yeah.
wasn't there other treasury?
Yes, so that's what we're going to talk about now. Those who check for mumin in the karbonos, right? You're not allowed to bring a carbon which has a blemish. So there were people who checked that. They were inspectors. They also took mental. So again, the Trumas Alishka was basically for karbonos. So this was part of the karbonos. It wasn't simply just to buy their karbonos. It was also to pay the people involved in checking their karbonos. That was also part of it. It wasn't just physically to buy the bulls and to buy the lambs for the karbonos. It was to pay the rabbis who checked. It was to pay the teachers who taught the hilchas shchita to the kohanim, not just the shchita itself, but all the processes of the kabbalah, lachas rika, all the avoda that they had to do. They would also get paid from tumas, which that was part of the deal. Talking about how to do kamitza. Remember kamitza with the fistful of flour that you're taking in your hand. That also the rabbis who taught them kamitza also not that was all legitimate. The rabbi saw that people had, in those days they had scrolls like our Sefer Torahs today, and over time there would be mistakes would fall into them. So the rabbis determined, again, the Rebbetzin said that those who check the svarim and correct them, they would take their schar from Tumas Elisha. What does this have to do with karbonos? So you could say that if there would be mistakes in Vayikra when it talks about karbanos, they might make a mistake karbanos. But otherwise, you could also say that there was, like we say, leib bez and masna land, that when they gave the Tumas Elisha, there was also for this purpose too, because they needed a source to take the money. So they used it from this fund, the fund of Tumas Elisha. Avram said, wasn't there other funds also? We're going to talk about that. That's going to be a discussion soon. So you know, they would also get the women who wove the curtains in the base of Mikdash, they would also take their scarf from that. Now, you might say, is that legitimate? What does that have to do with karbonos? We'll see. Va'ani Omer, Rav Nachman said this in the name of Rav, but Rav Nachman himself said, Ani Omer Mekotche Bedek Habayis, from a different fund. What's the fund? Bedek Habayis. What's Bedek Habayis? They would make donations to build the base of Mikdash. Bedek Habayis means literally for maintenance, construction. Anything involved in construction in the base of Mikdash came from Bedek Habayis. Bedek Habayis was for construction. Lishcha was for karbanos. So he said, Rav Nachman said, well, Rav said that the ones who weave the curtains, they take the scarf from Lishcha. I say, no, it's Bedek Habayis. Whole parochos tachas binyan asuyis, because the parochos were made in place of the binyan. As we saw, and we're going to explain in a minute. At the time, Shlomo's base of Mikdash, there was a wall between the Kodesh and the Kodesh, between the Heichal and the Heichal, between the Kodesh and the Kodesh, there was a wall. It's called Amatrax, it was an Amathik. Later on, when they built the later base of Mikdash, and certainly in Hordis's base of Mikdash, the second base of Mikdash, the structure was over three times higher in height, and an Amma thickness was not thick enough to maintain such a high wall. They couldn't change the thickness of the wall because that would eat into the kashkashim or eat into the heichal. They weren't allowed to mess with those measurements, but they did change the height. So how did they do that? They couldn't use a physical brick wall, stone wall, so they used curtains, and they had curtains on one side, curtains the other, with an amma in between. That was called the amatroxin. So he says, they were in place of the binyan. Those curtains that separated kashkashim was like construction, because that was to make the wall between the kodesh and the kodeshim. So therefore, if it's construction, it comes from Bedek Habayis, not from Tzlishka. Meisvei, kasha, nashim aragas b'brachos, the women who wove the curtains. And Beis Garmo Shammai, remember that family, they need the lechem, they knew how to make the lechem upon him. And Beis Aftinas Amaisak Torus, who made the Torus. They took their money from Tumas Alishma. Not like Rav Nachman said that the curtains came from Bedek Habayis. The answer is no. Those curtains that were made from Tumas Alishma, Hasan B'Abavi, those were not the same curtains, not the curtains that were used to separate as a wall between the Kodesh Kodeshim. Those curtains were at the gates, meaning for sneas, just that people shouldn't look inside. Those could have come from Tumas Alishma, because it was also considered Sorach Karbanos, but that wasn't considered construction. If it's construction, then it had to come from Bedek Habayis. As we see, there were 13 parochoses in the base of Mikdash, not all of them for the same purpose. There were 13 there. Shiva Keneged Shiva Shem, 7 opposite the seven gates. Those were for sneas. Those weren't for construction. You didn't have to have them there. Those could come from Tumas Alishka. One at the opening, that's also for sneas. One for the Pesach of the In other words, we have here 9 that were simply made as door stops, not physical door stops that you can't walk through, but simply that people should look in. That was 9. Go to the remaining 4. Then we have Beis B'Tfir, Beis B'Keneged and Ba'aliyah. Beis B'Tfir, the Tfir is that amatroxin that we're speaking about here. Rashi says here, and he brings down the Bavi and the Tfir, Shtaim B'Tfir, Tachas amatroxin, in place of Tfir. That means the Dvir in the Heichal between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodeshim. The Dvir is like another name for the Kodesh Kodeshim. So 2 on one side, 2 1 on either side, and then on the Aliyah on the upper chamber, also they had to have a curtain over there, also between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodeshim. So the ones between the Kodesh Kodeshim, those were really like construction. Those curtains were paid for out of the Bedek Habayis money. That was construction. The other 7, or the other 9 rather, that were simply for tznius, those could have come from Trumas Alishka, because that was considered a tzorcha carbon. Tanarabanan.
I wonder who takes the clean.
Yeah, wait for the clean. Tanarabanan. From Bedek Habayis. Bedek Habayis. That's Bedek Habayis. Yeah. Tanarabanan. Nasham Agados B'nei and Lepara. There were women who raised their children of Kohanim for the Paradumi. Remember, they raised them on stone. They gave birth there. In order not to become Tameh, they were extra careful because they were Matame them on the day they were osek with the Paraduma to be mostly leaving from the Tzdukim. The Tzdukim said it can only be people who were, if they were Tameh, they went to the mikveh and they also waited for Herav Shemesh. And we all have to wait for Herav Shemesh. Even somebody who just went to the mikveh, in other words, they were Tovel, that's what they call Tful Yom. They were Tovel that day, even though they didn't have a Shemesh, they could do it. So because we were Mekel with that halacha that we were Matame them, and then we went, put them in the mikveh, and then they did the avoda without waiting for Herav Shemesh, because we were Mekel there, we were Machmer in raising them in a state of total purity. So these women who did that, they volunteered to live in these stone areas for all this time while they were giving birth and raising these children. They also got paid because the paradum, even if it's not a regular carbon, it's a kind of a carbon. Also, it's related to the carbon of paraduma. They took their fees, and they're basically their maintenance, not necessarily a fee, but it's they had to get some support from Bruce Lisha. But Shaul said no. Nashim Yukaris, the wealthy women Shalim Hayuzanos, we used to feed them or some they would feed them and clothe them. From the wealthy people would do it. In other words, they had special donors who donated these things. Basically, what we're saying is it was schnorred. That's what we're saying. It was schnorred. Okay. But the
women who didn't want
it, or they weren't women of Kohanim. They were wealthy people were paid for these things, or others say no, they came from Tumas Rishon. Here's the big question of the day. Klisharis, what about the ministering vessels? When they made the vessels that were used in all the karbanos, etc., and all the abode in the base of Mikdash, what did that come from? Is that considered construction? Should it come from Bedek Abayis as part of the construction? Or, right? Tzorach Mizbeach Ninu, Umakashi Abayis. Ma'u, can you make him Makashi Abayis? Is it considered Mizbeach? Now, what was the Mizbeach? The outer Mizbeach? It was a stone structure that came from Bedek Abayis, right? As we'll see, as opposed to the Mizbeach Hazov, the inner Mizbeach, which was a movable little thing, that was a Kli. So the Kalim, where did they come from? We understand the structure, all the structure, the walls, etc. That come from Bedek Abayis, right? You say maintenance, it's all maintenance, right? So what about the Klisharis? Where did they come from? Did they come from Bedek Abayis? Sarach Mizbeach Ninu? Is it necessary for the Mizbeach there from Kosher Bedek Abayis? So they came from Bedek Abayis. Oh, do you say Sarach carbon and then necessarily for the carbon? And if it's from the carbon, it's Tumas Alishcha. You get questions you see from different funds. Is it from Tumas Alishcha or is it from Bedek Abayis? The Tumas Alishcha came from all the Jews. Everybody gave a half a shekel. The Bedek Abayis came from various donors, whoever donated money. So where did it come from? That was the question that he raised from that he asked of Rav. And Rav said, so this is the first opinion we see here, that the Klei Shares came from Trumas Halishcha. That's the first opinion we see. Eisvei Kasha. The Chalosim, it says in Daf Yomi, when they finished all the work of the building, the base of Mikdash, they brought from Melech and Yayada coin as Shara Kesef, the remaining funds. There's not an exact amount of money. They raised a few $1 million in Bedek Abayis, and they with the rest of the funds, Vayaseu Kalim, and they made Kalim based Hashem Klisharis. So what do you see over here? That they made the Kalim from Bedek Abayis money, the money that was left over from the construction. Malay, so he answered him. I guess this was Rav, and we answered Rav Huna. He says, you know what? So he answered him in a nice way. Whoever taught you ksubim, because that's Divrei Yamim, didn't teach you Nevi'im. Because in Nevi'im it says in Malachim, Ach lo yasa Beis Hashem, they should not be made, and as the Beis Hashem meaning from the Bedek Abayis, they should not make sipos, they shouldn't make spoons or cups, rather, not spoons, cups and other kinds of, the pasuk goes on to say other kinds of vessels. That money was given to the workers. I mean, when we say construction, Bedek Abayis construction, they had to be paid, the workers had to be paid too, it was given for the workers. So what do you see over here? That they did not use the Bedek Abayis money for Kalim. You couldn't make Kalim out of it. It was used for construction itself and for paying the salaries of the workers. So that's how he admonished Rav Huna. You bring right from Ksuvim that they did use the money of the Bedek Abayis for Kalim. Here you see in Melachim that did not. But so there's a steer between whatever you want to say. I didn't learn Melachim, but there's a steer between Melachim and Divrei Yamim. Lo kasha. Kansha gabu vo siru, kansha gabu lo siru. In one place, in the first place where they used the money from Bedek Abayis, and speaking where they collected X amount of money for Bedek Abayis, and there was extra money. They had extra money at the end after they paid the workers after the construction. There was extra money. But in the second case, when there wasn't extra money, it was just enough to go around and pay the workers, then they didn't use it. So what? If they collected it from Bedek Abayis, you can't use money for, we had this thing here too. If you raise money to build another building here, you can't take the money and use it for other services rendered here in the shul, right? So, so what if it was extra? It was still collected by guys. Amaravu, no. Lay bezin masna lane. The bezin, when they collected, the bezin of the Kohanim and the bezin in general, when they collected money for the Bedek Abayis, they made a tonight a condition that if they need the money, they'll need money. Imlav you look shars, they use for shars. It happens very often today. When they have to collect money for some kid needs an operation in America, and they raise $100,000, that if there's any left over, they could use that for other stock of money, other things. That's part of the collection process. So you're also imlav you look shars. It could be for klei. So what are we saying at this point? That what are the klei shares? What money is used for klei shares? The Trumas Alishcha. That's what Rav said. Trumas Alishcha money is used. However, there was a case when they used Bedek Abayis, if there was extra money left over and they had no other thing to do with it, then Besson could have said, yeah, we use the Bedek Abayis. But normally you don't use Bedek Abayis money for klei shares. According to Rav's opinion, it comes from the Trumas Alishcha. Tan Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Shmuel also says likewise. Remember that it's Rabbi Shmuel, even though many times you find Rabbi Shmuel differs with the Tana of Rabbi Shmuel, but as we'll see in this case, Rabbi Shmuel goes like Tana of Rabbi Shmuel. He says the same thing that Rav said. What does he say? That the Klisharis come from Trumas Alishka because that's considered a tzarach of the carbon and not considered tzarach mizbeach. Like we said at the top of the page, it's not tzarach mizbeach, which would come from Berek Abayis, but it's tzarach carbon, and therefore it comes from Trumas Alishka. Shnei, as it says, as Sha'ar HaKesef. Now, Rabbi Shmuel uses the very same pasuk. We explained the pasuk before in Divrei Yomim, Berek Abayis, and Lachim comes from. We said that there you can't use Berek Abayis money for Klei Sharis, right? So we said it's a stira. So we said, okay, Divrei Yomim was an exception because they had an account. There was extra money. Fine. Rabbi Shmuel says no. Even the pasuk in Divrei Yomim says es Sha'ar HaKesef. He doesn't mean the Berek Abayis. When they finish building, he's not referring to the same Berek Abayis money. He says after they finished building, they brought Sha'ar HaKesef, the remaining money, and they made vessels. They made Klei Sharis with that. It says Sha'ar HaKesef. Ezo Kesef sheyesh lam shirayim. What Kesef is considered to have leftover money? That's Daf Hayomi, that's Trumas Alishka. Because for the Trumas Alishka, they gave, remember, 3 times a year we learned in Shkolim, they gave 3 times a year, they put them into the various kupot there, and they would take out as necessary for the kabbalas, and then there was leftover money in there. That's what we call the Shiur Halishka. Right, that's Daf Hayomi, that's so which money is there that has leftover money? Sha'ar HaKesef, Daf Hayomi, that's Trumas Alishka, V'em Shirayim Gufayu. So maybe if you need to make vessels, you can only take it from the shiare, from the leftover ones. You can't take out the first money. When you take out the first money after you filled up the kupot, you can't use the first. Maybe you can only use the shiarim, the leftover money after the first monies were taken out. No, the answer is Karama. Like Rabba says, Ha'ola or the Rishona. When it says carbon Ha'ola, that means the first one. Ha'ola Rishona. Rashi says, Minayin Shaliyah Davar Kodam Ala Amarachal L'Tam Shal Shachar Tam Lavar Chaleh Ha'ola. The Ola means the first one. Hachanami HaKesef is Kesef Rishon. So we say that the vessels are made, the Klei Sharis come from Trumas Halishka. It doesn't mean Sha'ar. You could even take the first monies too. Not only you use for Karbanos, meaning, what do you do with that money? You use it for Karbanos. You use it, as we said, of an olive to pay the teachers who teach the Kohanim how to do it. You can take the first money also for the Klei Sharis, according to this opinion too. So Rabbi Shmuel has a better answer in a way than Rav answered Rav Huna, because he says the 2 psukim are not in stira. Both psukim effectively mean that you bait the Klei Sharis from Trumas Alishka. Meisvei, another kasha. So we said so far, both Rav and Rabbi Shmuel say the Klei Sharis come from Trumas Alishka. Meisvei, haktoras, toras, the incense, that's a kind of a carbon. Kol karbonos tzibur, bam Trumas Alishka. No argument there, right? All karbonos come from Trumas Alishka. Mizbeach hazav. Now, Mizbeach hazav, that's a kli sharis. It's not a permanent physical stone structure. Ulavona. Now, that's the frankincense that's used on the lechem apanim. That's the 2 cups of frankincense. But the Gra takes out lavona because lavona doesn't make as much sense. Lavona is really more like a carbon. Here we're talking about Mizbeach hazav. We're talking about the Klei Sharis. Ukli sharis. Bon mimosar nesachim comes from the surplus of the nesachim. What's the surplus of the Nesachim? So Rashi gives 2 explanations. The libations, right? The oil and the wine libations, either because when the person who supplies them gives a big amount. What do I mean by, he gives the cup of flour or whatever, is over full. It's what's the word? What's the English? Pardon? Meniscus, yeah, but what's the what?
It overflows.
An overflowing, it is in the form of a meniscus. But I meant to say when you give when it's overfull, when it's overfull. Rami, what's the word? When it comes from an overflow, and then they actually only use the exact amount. You have to use, how many log, etc., the exact amount that's written for each carbon. So so that extra amount could also be Rashi gives another interpretation that if whoever's supplying it agreed to give, let's say, 4 amounts to the dollar, and then the thing became more expensive, and then you get 3 amounts to the dollar, so he gives the extra amount, whatever the extra amount of the surplus of the libations, that's what Klei Sharis is made from. In other words, not from Berek Abayis, like we wanted to say, and not like from the Trumas Alishka, which was what we did say, according to Rav and Shmuel, but this is an opinion that it came from Moshe Nesachim. Mizbeach ha'ola, now that's the regular Mizbeach. Halishkos, the chambers, Azaras, the courtyards, all bonded Berek Abayis. That's all construction. Chutz l'chamas hazar. What about outside the chazar, like the esros nashim and the other structures outside there? Bon mishar, that comes from the leftover, whatever was used for the chambers, whatever money, meaning from Bedek Abayis paid for the chambers, whatever's left over the chambers is used for the outer chambers, let's say the Esros Nashim and the other walls. Zui Shishanina, this makes sense with what we learned. Chomas Ha'ir, the wall of the city, the wall of Yerushalayim, when we go say the towers, Kol Tzarchi, everything Bon Mishar came over from the extra amount, the leftover amount after you built the various chambers. But the point that we're raising over here is, you just said, what do we say till now? The first half of the page, Rabbi Shmuel and Rav said that the klei come from Truma Salishcha. Here you see that the klei are made from the Sachem. The answer is Tanoi, it's Machlokas Tanom. You're right. You have this brisa which says it came from most of the Sachem, but it's Machlokas Tanom. I'm going to show you that there is a Mandamar, other Tanoim hold, meaning not even Rav is also a Tana, but we have earlier Tanoim who also held that the klei came from Truma Salishcha. Where do we see this? It's not. Mosar Truma, listen carefully. Mosar Truma, that's really Truma Salishcha. Mosar Truma Maha Yosin. But what do they do with it? Tanakama says over here, the extra, the leftover part, the surplus part of the Truma money was used for Rikuesov. They had beaten golden plates. They used that to cover the floors and the walls of the Kachay Kachim. Whatever money was left over from the Truma Salishcha, meaning carbon money, was used to line the walls and the floor of the Kachay Kachim with gold plates. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Moser Peiros like Hitzim Mizbeach. So Rabbi Shmuel says that's the first opinion we talked about Moser Truma. Okay, so this first opinion clearly says that the Shiare Truma, the leftover part of the Truma money, the Truma Slishka was not used for clay sharas. Apparently, it was used for lining the base of Mikdash Kashkashim with gold. Rabbi Shmuel says Moser Peiros. And here's a new concept: the surplus of Peiros. What do we mean by that? We don't explain yet what that means. Well, we'll see soon what that means. Most of payers of the fruits, meaning the profits, like Heitzam Mizbeach. Heitzam Mizbeach means when the base of Mikdash was like in the summer session, meaning when there was no karbanos there was a shortage, people didn't have a lot of Dharm Davas, and you just wanted to keep the place running. You had shifts and stuff, and you need to go on him to do the work and bring karbanos. So most of payers, we'll see the profits that the base of Mikdash made by doing business was used. They used those profits to buy karbanos for Ketzim Mizbeach. Moser Truma leklei shares. Again, here we go again. The klei shares. This is like Rav and Rabbi Shmuel, that the klei shares were made from Moser Truma, not like the Tanakhama said here that Moser Truma was used for making gold plates for the Kodesh Kodashim, but the Moser Truma was used for klei shares. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Moser Truma leketzim Mizbeach. So here we have another opinion. What does that mean? Moser Truma leketzim. Yeah, well, that's karbanos, right? Moser Truma, you just use for the karbanos. You needed the basic karbanos, the karbanos that were brought, the musafim, the daily karbanos, etc. Rabbi Kiva says no. It was also used for karbanos only. Ketzim Mizbeach. Moser nesachim leklei shares. So here Rabbi Kiva is going with the opinion that we brought down in the kasha that the klei shares were made from Moser nesachim. So again, was it made from? Was the klei shares made from Trumas Alishra or from Nesachim? Here we have Rabbi Kiva's opinion. Rav Chanina's Kanakanav or no? Moser nesachim was for Ketzim Mizbeach. He says the extra karbanos get came from Moser nesachim. For Ketzim Mizbeach, the karbanos went in the downtime of the base of Mikdash. They brought karbanos from Moser nesachim. Moser Truma leklei shares. So here we have an opinion of Rav Chanina's Kanakahanim that this Tana Rav Chanina's Kanakahanim said that Moser Truma is for klei shares, that the klei shares come from Moser Truma, just like Rabbi Shmuel and just like Rav. So we have several opinions here that the klei shares were made from Moser, from the Trumas Alishcha. Moser Truma, same thing from the Trumas Alishcha. And we have another opinion that Moser Nesachim were made from klei shares. That the klei shares rather were made from the Moser Nesachim. We had that in the Kasha and we had that in Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Shmuel though said no. Moser Truma leklei shares. So we have Rabbi Shmuel, Tanur Rabbi Shmuel, and we have Chanina's Kanakahanim, and we have Rav, all said that the klei shares came from the Trumas Alishcha. Now, what did
Kanakahanim would know?
Yeah, you think so? He would know, right? And he was early. He was a Tan. Find him as a Tan in the Mishnah. V'zeh lo hayu modim b'peres. But both Rabbi Chanina's Kanakahanim and Rabbi Kiva, who differ as to how they made the klei shares. The klei shares, according to Rabbi Kiva, came from Moser Nesachim. According to Rav Chanis Kahanim, he went like Rabbi Shmuel and like Rav, Rav went like him, but that the Klei were made from Maser Truma. But they both agree that you didn't do anything with the payros, right? That we talked about at the beginning here that Moser payros are Ketzim Mizbeach, and Moser payros are Ketzim Mizbeach, and that was whose opinion? The Tanakama there, right? We had the Moser Truma Mayos, Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel said Moser payros the Ketzim Mizbeach. But what do you do with the Moser payros? That was used for the karbanos in the downtime, right? In the summer, like meaning in the downtime when they didn't have karbanos, they used that Moser payros. That's who said that? Rabbi Shmuel. Moser payros l'ketzim mizbeach, right? That's what he used. But Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Chanis Kahanim, who differed as to how they made the klei shares, because again, Rabbi Chanis Kahanim went like Rabbi Shmuel that Moser truma l'klei shares, and Rabbi Kiva said that the klei shares were made from Moser Nesachim, but they both agreed that they didn't use that payros, the Moser payros were not used, or it wasn't done. What is it? Lo yumodim b'payros. They were not motive payros used for anything. What do we mean by this? Payros mahi. The Tanya Moser truma mahi osenban. What did they use with the extra part of truma? Lochen payros bezol. They would buy produce cheap, and sell it high. Buy cheap, sell high, do business. And that's what they use for Ketzim Mizbeach. When he says there, Moser payros l'Ketzim Mizbeach, that's what Rabbi Shmuel said. Shmuel said, what do you mean Moser payros? What does it mean by Moser payros? He says, if you had any extra money left over from the Trumas Alishcha, right? Besides the fact that he said the klei shares were also, Rabbi Shmuel himself said the klei shares were made also from Trumas Alishcha. But if you had any extra money, you would do some business with it, buy and sell, make some money. And with the karbanos, you would, with the extra money, you would buy karbanos for the downtime. That's what we mean. Rabbi Shmuel said that Moser payros are for Ketzim Mizbeach, even though he also said that the klei shares were made from the truma, from the trumas alishcha. But he also said that if anything was left over, you could do business with it. So what do we mean that Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Chanis Kahanim were not motive to that? This is about the payros. The Tanan Moshe Shari Lishcha. What did you do with the extra part? Here now, notice he says lesson of Moser and Shiore. If it's confusing, Moser is the surplus and Shiore means the leftover. Here he seems to put them all together. The Moser, the surplus of the Shiore Lishcha, the surplus, whatever was left over after what was left, whatever the surplus of the leftovers, I think it's all the same. Osman, what did they do? Lokan ben Yanis Shmanim, they would buy wine and oil and flour. And they would buy and do business, and the sky goes like Rabbi Shmuel. Again, that's Rabbi Shmuel who said that that's what they did with the leftover money, the extra monies in the Trumas Alishcha. They would do business with it, and with the extra money, they would buy these karbanos for downtime. Rabbi Kiva Omer ein mistakrin b'shalekdish. You don't make money with shalekdish. You don't start doing business and profit Hekdish's money. Hekdish's money was donated by Bnei Yisrael for their holy purposes, and you don't start doing business there.
You can also lose money.
You can lose money too, right? Aflo b'shalaniyim, and you shouldn't also do if there's charity money. Somebody might say, oh, listen, we've collected, 10,000 shekels for the what do we call it, the Karen, Karen HaChesed. You know what? I can invest it. The stock market's going up. I can invest. I can have a chance to buy something. We'll still make some money. No, you don't do that. There's wealth, and the base of is considered wealth. It's like it's majestic. You don't start doing money with it, buying and selling and making profits. Why don't you do with aniyim, right? Maybe Anani will show up today. He'll need some money from the Karen HaChesed, and you're not going to have any money. Well, we've invested it. We have nothing liquid right now, so you don't do business with it. So that's why Rabbi Kiva and Rav Chanis Kahanim disagreed with Rabbi Shmuel about doing business with it. But as far as how do you make the klei shares, the predominant opinion is you do it with the Trumas Alishcha, and we had another opinion that is made from Moser Nesachim. That was Rabbi Kiva's opinion. So we have machlokas about that. We'll pick them here tomorrow. Mitzvah. Have a good day.
I assume the next phase of English won't be issued because God will be involved.
Yeah, we don't. That's a good assumption. We don't know.
You'll know the
We don't know. I think you'll still have plates all over donated by the Freedmans. This is donated